anyway, we'll get started. We have the pleasure this evening of having the company of Cathy Wilson. And now, Cathy, are you, what's your title there at Man's? I guess you're executive director or
Chief executive.
CEO. Okay,
Yeah.
CEO of Montessori in New Zealand,
Yeah.
Montessori Association in New Zealand. Yeah. Um, let's get started with what's your Montessori story? How did you discover Montessori
Well,
and
I'm
get to the
probably
point where you are now?
so in New Zealand, in the sort of there's quite a few of us have come to Montessori through our children. So back in 1990, when I was pregnant with my daughter, a friend of mine was actually part of the establishing of a local Montessori. So Montessori was sort of in that second revival in New Zealand. And so I sort of got involved selling boxes of chocolate, which I'd never sell now, and helping with fundraising to get this early childhood centre off the ground. So obviously I knew absolutely nothing about Montessori. I was purely just helping a friend out and enrolled my daughter. And anyway, she started at 2.5. And somehow, I don't actually quite know how, but at my first, I attended a committee meeting, and it ended up being the vice chair. And Chloe was only in there for a few months. And then the following year, I became the chair. And so, I really still knew very little about Montessori. And then it came a time where didn't have a teacher. Someone was off sick. And so I said, well, I can be a body in the classroom. I don't know anything really. But anyway, so I did that. I sat in the classroom and did whatever I did. And did that a few times. And actually, the more I was in the classroom, I thought, I actually need to learn a little bit more about this because I'm really interested. And so I did the New Zealand Montessori training and went through a stage where I had a son by then as well, and he was in a classroom that I ended up being in the afternoons, and that definitely didn't work. And anyway, I sort of moved to another centre and then on to Waiora Montessori School, which is our only state integrated school in New Zealand. And so I started off as an assistant and became a head teacher. And anyway, I stayed at that school. When I started there, it went from 3 to 12 years. I was there for just over 18 years. And by the time I left, we'd actually built it up from 18 months to 18 years. So I ended up being the DP there. And so working across all 3 sectors. I went off to, during my time there, went off to Thailand and did the 3 to 6 AMI training. So I was in the second block there, which was probably one of the most incredible experiences of my life. I was the only non-Thai student out of 100 students. So I was so well looked after and so immersed in the culture. So that was very, it was just amazing. Anyway, I back in New Zealand, and this role that I'm in now, this chief executive role, came up, and so I applied for that, and I've been sitting in this role for about 8 years now. Probably see it through to my retirement, I guess, maybe. So that's
can
me.
you talk a bit
abbreviated.
Can you talk a bit about the role of MANS in New Zealand and what
Sure.
you do?
So when I took over this role, Mans had a very little, tiny, squeaky voice at government level. And so I set about aiming to raise our Montessori profile. And I have been successful in that. I sit on a number of advisory groups. I represent our Montessori community in all 3 sectors, so early childhood, primary and high school level. So I'm part of the leadership group in our education sector now with with our education review office and with our teaching council and within the ministry. So I spend a lot of time sitting in on advisory and governance groups, and it's good to have our voice of Montessori not whether it's me or someone else, but it's great to have a Montessori voice coming through, and it means that I can very, very quickly get answers, and I have an input into the direction of the movement of the education sector. Not always in a positive way, but we keep trying. We have a lot of challenges here. In our early childhood sector, we're going through what's called pay parity. We're going through pay equity claim work at the moment, and now we're also being lumbered by the, sorry, I faded out there, with the union with fair pay agreements. So there is such amount of work happening, and plus there's been a lot of pressure put on, particularly the early learning sector, by the government, that's causing a lot of problems. We've got, major changes happening over here.
What's the attitude of the New Zealand government to Montessori, or at least the people that you're working with?
Sure. It depends on the flavour of the government, as I'm sure it impacts in Australia as well. So we've had a Labor government here for the last 6 years, and we've got an election in a couple of weeks on the same date that you've got your voice vote, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. But Labor is very much about everything being free, and I am simplifying it, but they are very wary about money going into the hands of private centres or private school owners, and so that causes quite a tension, whereas our national government is more pro small businesses, which a lot of our early childhood centres and schools are.
So in your time in Montessori, what have you most loved about being involved in Montessori education?
Children. Has to be the children. It's the only reason anyone's in education is for the children. They are what get me out of bed every day to fight for the work that I'm doing. It's always about the children.
How did you get the ear of government when you took over this role in MANS?
Oh, I'm pretty annoying and persistent. So I was always sitting. This position was always sitting on what's called the Early Childhood Advisory Commission, and that is a commission that the Ministry of Education started up about 13 years ago, because in particular the early childhood sector is so diverse. We've got so many different philosophies and ways of doing things, and so they wanted to bring us around a table. So there was always the voice of MANS around that table. But from there, it's when there was an advisory group getting formed, initially it was me, I'm available for that, and now it's Cathy, are you available for that? So it's been quite a shift, but obviously it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. It also, there's been quite a bit of pushback from the early childhood sector over here to the government, and that hasn't always gone down particularly well as well. So at the moment, what's happening is that the Ministry of Education is being really, really picky with centres and what's going on. I mean, in New Zealand, we're the second most regulated early childhood sector in the world. We sit behind America. So, it is just constantly a case of being available and being prepared to be strong enough to have a say as well.
What other alternative approaches do you sit around the table with?
Oh, a whole range.
What's your relationship?
Yeah. So in for the primary and high school sectors, it's more state driven. So there aren't the same variety of philosophies. I mean, we have what's called kura kaupapa, which is the Māori schools. We have a couple of Steiner schools. I think they've got 2 colleges, but they're relatively small in the New Zealand market, and they're really struggling. But the rest are all more mainstream. So in an early childhood, the whole raft. So we have, home based and play centre and kahanga reo, which is Māori equivalent. In early childhood, we have Pacifica centres. We have obviously kindergartens, and then and Steiner. I think, very, very similar to what you have in Australia, we have in New Zealand, a whole raft. I think there's about 18 of us stakeholders who sit around the early childhood table a lot.
And do those alternative approaches, do the representatives speak with one voice? Do you get together to speak to government, or are they more separate?
Yeah, no, it was the Minister of Education about 3 years ago said that he made a mistake and said to us at a meeting one day, the early childhood sector actually needs to get organised. If you want to be taken seriously, you need to get organised. Well, we've done that, and which means we now have a combined voice pushing back, and they're not so keen on it now. And we have reminded the minister, who's now a prime minister, a number of times, you told us to get organised. That's what we've done. So yes, I work very closely with 4 or 5, particularly very closely, and then the rest loosely. Yeah. So we will do joint media releases. We'll do joint letters to the minister, etc., etc. Yeah.
What are some of the changes that you think you've been able to make in education, particularly early childhood?
Well, we managed to get funding for 5-year-olds, because in New Zealand it's traditional that you go to school at 5, which is not the same as in Australia. So that has been I would say that's one huge success, has actually been getting funding to stay in the early childhood sector and have the choice up until the age of 6. Major changes. Well, just recently with our budget release in May, ones who worked together, we pushed back on something that the government was trying to bring through, and we got that reversed, which was a bit of a win. I don't, to be honest, it's hard to think of things individually because there is so much going on all the time. I mean, during COVID time, that was a massive, we had to all of us had to be, as I know you would have had to have been in Australia as well, we all had to be so agile and able to and prepared to make changes constantly. But what's happened since then is that, and I don't know if it's the same for yourselves, but we've got so many people that are at stress burnout out, particularly the teachers, and we've got a lot of extremely anxious children that have come back from lockdowns, etc. And so a lot of my time now is spent not just with the ministry and ERO and the teaching council, but also with a lot of pastoral care with my members. So I part of my role, I try and make a point of getting around and visiting all of my members on a 3-yearly rotation, which means I know them, they know me. They can pick up the phone, they can send an email, and I'll always respond, and I'll always spend the time if they need me. And that seems to be more and more what's come through in the last 12 months. I'm really needed, even if it's just to be an ear to listen to people. Yeah. So I feel that's probably a success, that people feel they can do that they can actually pick up the phone or email. They've got, someone at the end who's going to just listen or, offer some advice if needed.
What's the profile of Montessori to the general public in New Zealand? Do you think it's well understood? Is it widely Is it a household name yet, or is it
Yeah,
unknown?
I don't think it's a household name, but I think the majority of people would know or would have heard the name Montessori, whether they necessarily know what it is. One of the things I did last year was employ a social media person, and so with the intention of raising and spreading the name and the knowledge or the some sort of idea of what Montessori is. So her job has been very much getting it out to parents and to grandparents and all of those sorts of things. And certainly we've seen a rising social media presence in all of the platforms that we use, and I think that's been useful. We are very fortunate in the respect that our Montessori principles align beautifully with Te Ao Māori principles, and so that is a fortunate strength that we have, and therefore Montessori is very quickly accepted by, or has been accepted by our Māori people as well. So that's a good move. But there's always more we can do. We always need to reach out to more people. I mean, that's as far as I'm concerned, every single centre and school should be Montessori, and the kids would be so much better off.
Mm. What is it about Montessori that serves the Maori community well?
It's well, the principles of Montessori weave and align seamlessly. So they hold what's called the kakanal, which is which is the seed, which is the child. So they hold that very much at the center of everything that they do and believe in within their culture. As do we. We hold the child as being the most precious tonga, the most precious gift that we have. So um so right from that very first thing, in the our what we call tuatana taina, which is what we do in Montessori every day, which is the older children are looking after the younger children and are their teachers, and the younger children, our tainas, are very much working with working with the older children, or looking up to them, or observing them, or whatever's happening in the classroom. So those they're just two examples of Māori principles that just weave seamlessly in with what our Montessori principles are as well.
So, how do you make the case for Montessori to new members of government that you meet who may not know about Montessori?
Well, one of the first things I do is share within our Montessori Journey to Excellence, which is our early childhood curriculum that we've written over here. So that's if I'm meeting a new person in the ministry, that's a gift that I give them from the Montessori community, so that they can read a little bit about what is happening and what they should be seeing in our classrooms or our environments. But if I'm asked, really I'd be talking about the compassion and the humility that we go and is seen all the time in our environments, where you see, even right down to the young ones, and they'll be tying the shoelace of another child, etc. All of those things that we just take for granted, but doesn't necessarily happen in other types of the the mainstream early childhood or mainstream schooling environments. I mean, there is just so much that we're so fortunate for, that we see happening every day, that we just take for granted, because it is just what we expect. It's what we do. It's what the children do, which is, we're just so lucky in our Montessori lives.
How um, how widespread is Montessori in New Zealand now? How many early childhood centres and schools are there?
So we have just over 200 early childhood centres and 24 primaries and 3 high schools. We've got another high school starting up, which should be off the ground next year, beginning of next year. Our early childhood sector is still growing slowly. So we've had another, I don't know, another 3 have opened up this year, which is great, and another primary have opened up this year. The primary and the high schools are harder to grow into than the early childhood sector, because we have what's called, we have 16 of our Montessori, we call them Montessori units, and so they are Montessori classrooms within a traditional primary school. And so in the units, there's always a compromise about the Montessori issue that's in there. And the reason being is that the teachers, even though they're Montessori teachers, they are employed by what's called the Board of Trustees of the school. And the Montessori unit still has to work within what's going on in the primary school. So they're always a little bit of a, there's always a bit of a tension there. In our high schools, we have one what's called state integrated, and the other 2 are private. And the next one coming along next year is actually going to be attached to a kura kaupapa, so they're attached to the local secondary school in that area, which is going to be quite cool. Be good to see how that sort of develops. So in New Zealand, we have, very roughly about 4,500 early childhood centres, roughly 2,000 primaries and 1,000 secondary schools. So yeah, that's pretty what's in our education sector.
So my quick back of the napkin calculation, that's about 4.5%.
Yeah, be nice if it was larger. As I said, I think, yeah, well, I still believe that as I said, all of our early childhood centres and all of our schools in New Zealand should be Montessori.
Yeah. Why do you think they aren't? Why, we've had about 15 years now in the Montessori movement worldwide. It's such a great idea. It's, a solution to so many problems in education. And Montessori schools are doing great work all over the world with individual children and families. However, we haven't really reached the point, except maybe in a few isolated places like perhaps the Netherlands and a few other places where it's to the density where it can fulfill Maria's dream of changing society from within. But in most countries, we're nowhere near that. I think in Australia, we only 0.5% of schools are Montessori. Why do you think it hasn't become more widespread?
Well, in New Zealand, we had the first wave of Montessori came through in roughly 1920, late teens in 1920, and then it died out just like it did in many parts of the world. And then we had our second surge start, sort of it began about in the 1970s and slowly built. But what happened in the 1950s is that the government signed an agreement with the Kindergarten Association. So they are the preferred provider of early childhood in New Zealand. So any other philosophy is always going to be struggling in New Zealand to actually, well, you can't break what is a, agreement with the government. It's a state sector's agreement. So the teachers in kindergartens get paid directly by the Ministry of Education, whereas everyone else pays their teachers themselves. So yeah, so Montessori is always going to be battling against that, and that just, it won't change. What is changing is that the kindergartens are now starting to go into longer days, and some of them are starting to work during school holidays, etc., so that they can get more funding from the government. And so they're becoming more and more like what we call, the rest of us are called education and care. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But with regards to Montessori, not everyone people might know of Montessori, but they don't necessarily know the value of Montessori. And in New Zealand, we also don't have enough Montessori trained teachers. And I'm not certain how you are in Australia, but I think it's pretty well around the world sort of shortage. But we're constantly struggling to get enough trained teachers. So
Yeah,
then you get
yeah.
watered down. Centres as well.
Yeah. What do you think we can do to change this situation?
Well, it'd be lovely if training was cheaper. But that's not, everyone's got costs that they need to cover. I mean, I do what I call a Montessori 101, which is very much an intro, just I'd rather people had some knowledge of Montessori than be running a centre and have very little knowledge of Montessori. So I don't know. It's a really something that is just hard. Yeah, I mean, we just have to keep encouraging people to train. I mean, we have a scholarship here that people can train and do a 3 to 5 training, and it's and they complete it, they'll get all their course fees back. We're just launching a Montessori Masters next year, which I'm sure will get some buy-in. People are always looking at many people are always looking to sort of upskill themselves. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that goes. Yeah, I mean, I have memorandum of understanding with a couple of our tertiary providers here, and that makes Montessori training a little bit more accessible. But, it's hard. It's really, really hard. It's a constant struggle. We don't have enough teachers.
Yeah. Is there a book that you like to give people to read about Montessori to kind of spread the word?
Oh, dear idea. One book. I actually really like Education and Peace. I actually really like that book. It's probably not the most common one people would reach for, but I think it's yeah. And actually, if I was really thinking about other little books, I love the Montessori book that is full of the letters that Montessori wrote to her grandchildren, and then there's another little book that Montessori it's got letters written to her father, and I think they're such endearing little books to read and give a really great background as to the way Montessori's thoughts and feelings as she um, spread the word around the world. Yeah.
Mm. I want to give an opportunity to anybody else to ask questions. Does anybody have a question or a comment they'd like to give Cathy?
Well, that was easy.
So, Cathy, what's the situation with training in New Zealand?
So we have a level 5, which I'm not certain what that would equate to for yourselves. That's pretty much more is a very basic level of Montessori. And then we also have Maria Montessori Education Foundation, which is the AMI Training Centre. So they are doing about their 5th or 6th 3 to 6 training. We've never had a full training in AMI other than a 3 to 6 in New Zealand. Generally, our teachers will go offshore. Well, they do go offshore to do a 6 to 12 training or a 0 to 3 training. So we've had teachers, I went to Thailand. We've had teachers in England, Italy, Canada, America, etc., etc. And as I said, we've got our Montessori Masters starting next year, or 2 Montessori Masters papers.
Mm. Ilona, sorry, I didn't see your hand. What did you have a question?
Yes, sorry. I had some troubles with my computer. I have a question about for both of you. I mean, for all of us. Do you think that for Montessori advocacy, it's better to have like a service about key performance indicators concerning well-being and the knowledge of children? Because we all know, as Montessori guides, we all know the benefits that Montessori pedagogy can have for children. But for the common knowledge and for the government and for private founders is not so obvious. So do you think that having that on the worldwide scale, like constant service about with basic KPIs at the individual and collective level, do you think that can be something that can be implemented and that can work for Montessori advocacy? I don't know if I'm clear with my question.
Can I just clarify? Are you suggesting that every centre and school should have KPIs set? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah.
So I would say that in New Zealand, that happens anyway, because we have, everyone has to do an annual plan. So I would say that right through the early childhood and the compulsory sectors, that everyone's got a annual plan that they write themselves, and right through to Mans has a strategic plan, and then I write an annual plan every year. Don't always meet it. I always start with the intention. But yeah, so I guess you could refer to those as KPIs.
But
does that answer your question or not really?
Yes, that's still like, do you think that we can have something that can be globalized in order to show how Montessori pedagogy works for the basic knowledge of children and for their well-being? Do you think that can be something that we can work on, something that can be globalized for every Montessori school from 3 to 6 or 6 to 9, etc., etc.?
Well, I guess everything's a possibility. You just got to have someone driving it, and you've got to have buy-in.
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
You've got to have buy-in in the respect that people would have to agree to it. So
yeah,
So there's no reason why you couldn't. But as I say, you're going to have someone driving it and being prepared to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not certain about Australia, but I guess it's here it's very easy to get bogged down with everything you're doing in your own country, and it's harder to sort of look globally at times to be thinking of, I don't know, coming up with a worldwide strategic plan. I guess AMI's probably got one. I'm not certain that in fact, sorry, I do know that they've got their own strategic plan. I don't know if they've ever thought about sort of spreading something out. Yeah.
We don't do marketing very well, though, in Montessori. I think the Montessori community worldwide has tended to just think that Montessori is such a great idea. It's such a great approach that we just need, people will hear about it and they'll come flocking to us. Unfortunately, the world doesn't seem to work that way.
No.
And Montessori organizations don't really do marketing very well. And the other problem that you raised is getting people to agree on it. Getting Montessorians to agree on anything is really difficult. As you know, So getting to agree on a marketing plan is probably pretty challenging. But, you know, I've always felt that what we need is, you know, we need the evidence, definitely, but we also need to capture the imagination of the population. And, you know, there has never been, you know, a big Hollywood blockbuster about Maria's life, which I just don't understand. Why not? I mean, there's her life was so interesting and so revolutionary and so full of intrigue. It would just make such a great Hollywood movie. But there's, to my knowledge, there's only been an Italian two-part miniseries that was in Italian with Spanish subtitles and no English at all. And apart from that, I don't think there's been any movies made about her life, which is really strange. But if there was,
there is something on the internet. I think it's about Famous Woman or whatever, and she's one of the people it's been done on, and it is actually quite a good. You know, if you're ever wanting to learn more about Maria, it is there, but you've got to, you know, it's one of those things you've got to know to look at, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely been a few docos about her and a few indie little movies, but I mean, we really need a big blockbuster to capture people's attention and to get out there and to inspire people to look further into Montessori.
Maybe we need to go to our Google Montessorians and you know, talk to them about funding one.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions?
Excuse me, can I speak? So I'm Guzalkan from Uzbekistan, and I'm new to Montessori method of education, and I really like to learn it since I'm a new mama. Now I'm eager to learn, and currently I'm doing my master's in Tallinn University and going to do my thesis in the Montessori method of education. And actually, I'm going to compare the digital games and the Montessori method of education as I am studying in digital learning games. So my question is, for the future, I'm going to continue my career in Montessori. And can you give me some advice?
Some advice on
Regarding this? Uzbekistan.
Can you repeat the question? You dropped out there for a moment.
Okay. I mean, the Montessori is really new topic in Uzbekistan, and now like young people are going to be interested and they are learning independently. So we don't have any Montessori association in Uzbekistan, but I'm going to implement Montessori ideas, principles to the Uzbekistan education, I mean the early childhood education, in the future, like upcoming years. So I need expert advice. And in terms of training, like there are I found different trainings in Tallinn here, because there is a Montessori association in Tallinn, and there is assistant training and then diploma course.
So you're wanting to know which would be best to do? Is that right?
Yeah, what should I start doing? Now
Okay.
I'm learning independently.
So there are many different training organizations around the world. And really it's a case of what depth of Montessori training you want to do and is accessible to you and you can afford to do. So there are online trainings, online Montessori trainings, and there are like part online, part face-to-face, and then there are fully face-to-face trainings. So it really depends on, I mean, Montessori Aotearoa New Zealand is not affiliated with any one education provider, and we have done that deliberately. So we don't So because we have different varieties of training in New Zealand. So as I said, we've had teachers go offshore and do training, but we also have probably the very, very basic training you would find if you were paying for it would be the NAMIC training. And then it goes all the way through. I know in Australia you've got MWEI as well. You've got AMI trainings. You have got different organisations that have developed their own trainings. There's, of course, I don't think you can do AMS training in Australia, can you? You have to go to America to do AMS?
In Tallinn, there is AMIS association. I mean, they are offering courses, trainings. I mean, assistant courses. It's real certified course, right?
Okay, so
you're
talking about the orientation, the AMI orientation.
Yeah, orientation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the orientation, they are you'll get a certificate for it, but they are an introduction. They are not a full training. So what you're going to get is a little bit of theory, and you'll make some materials, but it's an introduction. It's not a full training. And they would.
But what if I'm going to work in Montessori? I need to get a training, right?
You need to do a diploma training. Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer that any monkey can present the materials, the Montessori materials, but it's what sits behind the Montessori materials that you need to know. So, what age you would present the materials, what the direct aim, what the indirect aim is, what comes before, what materials come before, what materials come after, what the point of interests are. So there's so much to learn apart from just being able to present the materials. And the actual Montessori philosophy is, it's very important to gain an understanding of that, because that actually helps you to understand children. So you're learning about child development, but you're also, if you're doing a 0 to 6 training, you're going to be learning about the absorbent mind and sensitive periods and the stages of obedience, etc., and particularly also how to observe. So observations in Montessori is like one of the cornerstone of our work that we do. We don't observe. We've got no idea what the interests of the children are. We've got no idea where children are. So, yeah, I mean, do an orientation, which will give you a great taste, and actually, you may do an orientation, decide it's definitely not for you. So as an introduction, absolutely fine, but it's not a full diploma. You won't learn anything about hands-on of the materials.
But for the introduction, I can learn, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The orientations are a great introduction.
I mean, so far I took some courses they're not real certified courses, because it's just introduction, and I read some of the books of Mario Montessori. And if I take assistant orientation course, can I start working in the real atmosphere?
Well, that would be up to whoever's employing you. So, I mean, it's, yeah, I can't speak for what would happen over in Pakistan. I can't speak for what happens in Australia.
No, it's Uzbekistan.
Yeah, I can only speak for what happens in New Zealand. So an orientation course isn't a Montessori training. So you wouldn't be employed as a Montessori directress with an orientation course. But they are a great introduction to, dip your toes in.
So, one of the things I remember from training and reading Montessori is that she said that when we do training, we become a technician and a saint. And those two sides of the training are really both very important. So technician means that we learn how to use the materials. We're very proficient with the materials. We understand the aims and the indirect aims and what age they need to be presented at. However, it's equally, if not more important, that we look at our own attitudes, right? And when she talked about being a saint, it means that we can put the child the child's need, we can see the child's needs ahead of our own needs. So if we come into the classroom with our head full of our own agenda and we're projecting our agenda onto the child, then we won't see the child for who they are. And adults tend to have these preconceived ideas about children needing to be helped by adults. We need to be doing things for them because they're helpless. So a lot of the Montessori training is about changing those attitudes and seeing the child as completely capable of educating themselves. So all we need to do is present the materials when we observe that they might be ready for those materials, and then for the most part get out of the way. And a lot of being a Montessori teacher is removing the obstacles from the child being able to educate themselves. Would you say, Cathy? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we talk about the triangle. So we have the teacher, the child, and the materials. And so our, the job of the directress is to, or the director is to, or the guide is to connect the child. We do a presentation, and then we leave the child or children to explore with the materials. As long as they're not misusing them, they're welcome to explore with them as they see they'd like to do. So we connect them.
Ilona, would you like to talk about your comment?
Yeah, it was about your idea. I really noted that down because I really loved how you expressed that, capturing the imagination of people about Montessori. And you talked about the need to have a big Hollywood production about Maria Montessori's life. And that made me thought about this movie that we had in France, made 5 years ago, I think. A Montessori kindergarten was filmed for 18 months in continuous, so that made the movie, a final movie, about 1 hour and a half, 2 hours maximum. So I made that as an example. I put that comment as an example of individual initiative. How can we advocacy for Montessori, not only speaking about Maria Montessori's life, but also showing what this is in a day-to-day kindergarten. I mean, on the internet, I'm sure that we all see some marketing movies made by private Montessori schools. This is how a typical day is in our kindergarten, in our primary school, etc., etc. We know that's only marketing, but on the same level, on a higher level, we can have this type of film, and I think that can be more easily made than a Maria Montessori biopic. That's an idea. For those of us who speak French, you can look on the internet for this movie called The Master is the Child, so Le Maître et l'Enfant. It's a nice initiative, so you can look it up. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cathy, from your experience in New Zealand, what do you think are some important steps for Montessorians to give greater advocacy for Montessori in government in particular, but also for the general population?
Oh, I think we need to, I think it's important to prepare ourselves as best as possible as Montessorians, as teachers, to, we want, to live very much the life that we want to see coming through in our society. So, respect for ourselves, respect for others, respect for the environment.
A model.
Yeah, absolutely. Model what we're wanting the next generation to be coming through with. Yeah, we want to see that compassion coming through.
You talked a little bit about long daycare in Montessori. Do you think that long daycare makes it difficult to do authentic Montessori today?
No, no, not at all. I mean, you know, I mean, I'm not certain what you term as long daycare, and we don't use that term over here. So we would, I mean, we do have children that, you know, in some centres that are open from 7:30 in the morning till, you know, 6 o'clock at night. But there is no reason why you can't be doing Montessori right throughout the day. There are so many activities. I mean, in actual fact, you're better off to be keeping your Montessori environment flowing throughout the day for the consistency of the children. We know that children can, you know, easily work in a 3-hour work cycle. Some of them might need a rest. We know that they're going to get a false fatigue sometime during that, but you're far better off to have the consistency of your Montessori there, rather than saying, okay, now we're going to go outside and play, or now we're going to do a you know, a group language, you know, and do a large all group all classroom group of some description. I mean, Montessori works, and we just need to let the flow of that work for the children as well. So harmonizing our indoor outdoor environments, so children can flow, you know, they can, you know, when you're offering a presentation, oh, shall we do this, whatever the piece of work is, should we do this inside or outside? There's no reason why Montessori materials can't flow into our outdoor environments as well as our indoor environments, apart from things like the golden beads. I wouldn't be suggesting that, but very little else can't go outside. Looking.
Are there any areas, Cathy, that you think Montessori needs to be updated to better fit the modern reality in New Zealand?
I think that Montessori works just as well today as it did in 1907. The children are exactly the same. It's just that what's happening is that they are having barriers put up in front of them. They're having access to screens, etc., etc. I mean, you all know this yourselves, and the damage that does to their eyes, to their memories, to their brains, etc., etc. So I think we need to keep selling the fact that Montessori works, and it works just as well today as it did then. It doesn't. I mean, Montessori was certainly someone who didn't hesitate to move with the times. There is no two ways about that. I mean, we all know that she was, you know, so much wiser than all of us would be even put together, and was always looking at the next thing ahead. But I don't believe she would have been bringing those screens into the classrooms, into the early childhood sector. I'm not certain. I don't think she would have been anyway. So I think we still need to maintain and keep those screens out of early childhood and minimise the amount of use in the primary. Obviously, in the high school sector, they live on their computers. It's part of what they do with their work. But I think we do need to be careful that we do try to stay true to Montessori and remember that it does work. We're the ones who are putting the barriers up for those children today.
Here. It's a great note to finish up on. Cathy, thank you so much for your time this evening. It's been really fascinating chatting with you.
You're welcome. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everybody. See you in a couple of weeks.
Kia ora. Good night.